This position was sent to me by one of my subscribers. And as I was looking at it, I couldn't help but have the feeling that maybe I've already covered this on the channel, but I wasn't about to go back and look through hundreds of puzzle videos to find out. So we're going to look at it again because even if I've done this one, it's worth looking at it a second time. And my subscriber's name is Andy, and Andy said this is one of his favorite puzzles, and I can see why. And if you guys haven't seen this one before, you're going to appreciate this, okay? So if you would like to pause and try to figure out what's going on here, it's white to play and get a draw. Okay, white's pawns are going forward, black's pawn is going this way. White to play and get a draw. Before I say too much, go ahead and pause. And a big thank you to Andy for sending me this position. All right, guys. Well, if you had a chance to look at that, of course, you need to consider what happens if we just get a queen because it's right there. Why not? Well, the reason is there's a skewer. Bishop to f5 check forces your king to move. And even if you think, well, okay, I'll lose the queen, but I'm going to go get the pawn. No, you won't because the bishop defends the pawn. And if you try to take the bishop, well, the pawn is gone. You're not going to catch it, right? It's just going to keep going and get a queen. So that's not going to be good enough for you. And if you try to blockade it, Black's king is still going to come over and eventually force you to move, and this is just a winning endgame for Black. The bishop is too powerful along with the king's help, and there's nothing you can do, okay? So that's why you can't just get the queen. Now, once you realized that, you might have thought about a couple of different things. Maybe one of them was, well, let me just move my king up, get out of the way, and I'll get the queen next turn, right? What's the problem with that? Well, that's right. Black's just going to put the bishop there and always is going to sacrifice the bishop for the queen and then push this pawn. For example, here, takes, and then you're going to play b5. You can't catch it again. Okay, so a simple move like that doesn't work. Now, you might have also thought about two other things. You might have thought about moving your king here with the idea of, look, I don't really care about getting a queen. I'm going to sneak around and take the pawn. And I am threatening to get a queen right now if Black doesn't stop me. So Black's forced to play bishop f5, and I'm going to use this opportunity to move my king around and come over here and get the pawn. The problem is, again, similar to what we saw, Black's going to just put the bishop there to defend their pawn. You can't do anything because if you ever try to come around this way, for example, just say something like this happens and you try to sneak in here. Actually, sorry, it is tricky, but what Black's going to do is play b5 here first. And then when you come in, they just move the bishop, right? And you can't catch the pawn. They've stopped you here, and you can't really win, okay? So that's the problem, going back to the beginning here. That's the problem with king to d6. Black's just going to go here, put the bishop on c8, and what are you going to do, okay? Now, there's one other idea that maybe came to your mind, and it's to move king to e6. Now, king to e6 looks pretty good because we're saying, look, you can't go there anymore, and I'm still threatening to get a queen. And if you push your pawn, of course, I get the queen. Looks pretty good, but the problem is king to f4. And Black simply defends that square, so now the bishop can go there, and you still have the same problem of, like, how are you going to stop this? How are you going to get a, what are you going to do, right? And if you go here, it's going to be the same story, right, where the bishop can just go to c8 whenever it wants, and you can't really take it, and we already looked at it, right? So what do you do if you're playing as white? We already talked about pretty much every move. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is king to c8, which we didn't talk about. And it looks like a ridiculous move because, first of all, we're not really threatening the pawn. The pawn can just move, and we're not going to catch it. And second of all, we've just blockaded our pawn, so we can't even get a queen now. Why would we do that? Well, let's take a look. b5, and I've got to say, this looks to be, I've played chess a long time. And from a quick glance at this position, this looks like one of the most losing positions you could possibly have. And it's very obvious why, right? This guy is going to become a queen, and your king is unable to stop it. Therefore, your only chance is to somehow get a queen yourself, except your king's in the way, and as soon as you move your king, Black says, okay, thank you very much. Have a nice day. The game is over, right? Like, what am I missing here? And yet, despite what I just said, this position is a draw. It's a draw. What's the drawing move for white? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is king to d7. It's like, wait a second, Nelson. Wait a second, Nelson. You're telling me we moved here to attack the pawn moves forward, and now we go back to where we were. And even though we still can't catch the pawn and Black still has the same trick, now it's a draw? what is going on, right? What is going on? Well, let's talk about it. Suppose there's two things black could try here. I would say bishop to f5 check and b4. Both of these moves look pretty good for black. Okay, so let's start with the bishop check first. Bishop check, and what black is doing is saying, look, I'm going to go ahead and take care of this problem first, and then I'll push my pawn and get a queen, and the game is over. So what do we do? The move is king to d6. And you might be thinking, okay, that doesn't really look like it helps us because we can't get a queen. Yes, we're trying to catch the pawn, but black's not going to let us. They're going to push it. What do we do now? Get a chance to look at that. The move is king to e5. And what we are doing, guys, is taking advantage of the crooked path. Okay, the crooked path. Now, the crooked path is an endgame technique with a king that you need to be aware of. And it works like this. Imagine that I want to move my king from here to here. Okay? There are multiple ways that I could get there that all take the same number of moves. So for example, I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 4 moves and I would land on that square. I could also go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so look at that. We have 2 different paths, but they both take 4 moves. But another path that you maybe didn't think about is 1, 2, 3, 4. It's also 4 moves, and I still end up on the same square. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? Because what this move does, believe it or not, is actually still chasing the pawn in a weird way, but it's still chasing the pawn, and at the same time, it's creating a new threat on the bishop. And why is that a problem? Well, because if black ignores the bishop and keeps pushing the pawn, guess what? We take it, and guess what? We get a queen, and now it's a draw. Okay, cool. So black needs to move the bishop somewhere. Let's just say they move it here. And guess what? Now we continue chasing the pawn, but we got ourselves a free move because we forced the bishop to move. So now when we go king to d4, look what happens. Look at this. We're able to catch it. And you say, but black can just defend. Well, yeah, they can, but now we can simply get the queen. And we force them to take, and we take here. Aha. Do you guys see how that worked? The crooked path is the key to getting a draw in this endgame. It's fascinating, right? It's absolutely fascinating because you think about king to d4 and you think, why do I want to go away from the pawn? Well, you need to because you have to attack the bishop, but you're still 4 moves away from this square, regardless of how you went, right? Amazing stuff. Now, let's go back. I said there was bishop f5 check, but black could also just push the pawn straight away. They don't have to go check. They can just push it. And what do? It's the same idea. We go king d6. And we, believe it or not, we are chasing the pawn. But if the pawn moves, what are we going to do? Well, we get the queen. We're also threatening the queen. So we kind of transpose to the same thing. Bishop goes here. Guess what? King e5. Same idea. We attack the bishop. We threaten the pawn. And because of that trick, the game is a draw. The crooked path saves the king. Now, you might be wondering, well, why did we have to start all of this with king to c8? Why couldn't we just immediately do this crooked path thing? And the reason is, remember when I said here, black would play bishop f5 and then sit the bishop there and defend the pawn? That's why. We had to force the pawn to move so that it could not be defended, right? Because when we play king c8, this is the only way to do it. This is the only way to attack the pawn initially. And by doing that, and by the way, I should mention, if black tries to defend this way, what do? That's correct, king to b8. And we keep the pressure there. We also create a new threat of getting the queen. So black has to go here, and then we take the pawn. Okay. But when we play king c8, we force black to move it, and now it becomes a target for us, for our king to hunt it down, and the bishop can no longer sit on c8, defend the pawn, and blockade ours at the same time. The bishop has to choose, is it going to stop our queen, or is it going to defend the pawn? And that is why we had to do that. And you have to be careful, because if you make the wrong choice of going like this, you don't have the option to attack the bishop, right? And black just sits it there and you have nothing to do. You had to use the crooked path, right? And it's the same idea. If I want to move my king 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's just say 6, I could also go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Look at that. Same number of moves, but in one case, I attack the bishop. In the other case, I don't. Really, really, It's a really, really cool puzzle, but it's also an instructive puzzle because this kind of stuff happens in real games where you have a king and pawn ending or there's another piece involved and you need the king to do multiple things. You have to remember the crooked path. Okay? So hopefully that's a good takeaway for you guys that you can actually apply in your games. There's multiple ways for a king to get to the same square, right? You can go straight, you can go sideways. And what I like to do when I'm playing in king and pawn endings is I think about like, okay, where do I most likely want my king to be? Let me go in that direction, but at the same time, I'm going somewhere else, maybe to take a pawn or something. So there's lots of cool endings like this. Maybe we'll look at some more in the future, but thank you, Andy, for sending that in. Congratulations if you found that. Not an easy puzzle at all. A very weird move, right? King c8 to go back to d7 is the only way to get a draw in this position. It's kind of mind-boggling. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.